and now we will go to questions from the audience. I will read the questions. Our candidates will answer. And the first question that I ask will be answered by Mr. Vitolo first. The question is, what is your opinion on Common Core as it is being overseen by the Federal Department of Education?
First of all, I think that the Federal Department of Education is a department that no longer needs to exist in this country. We have a state education department. We have county education departments. We have enough education departments in this country. It's one of those overreaching areas by the federal government into our schools, forcing our schools to do things and teach curriculum that isn't even profitable. The Common Core is a bad curriculum in many, many ways because it is forcing down the throats of the citizens of America a global philosophy that will, this whole over sensitivity of racial issues and oversensitivities of the LGBT people and oversensitivity. Listen, we need to accept people for who they are. We need to work with people. We need to have and listen, I believe that you need to love people for who they are. You can't make someone something that they're not. But that doesn't mean that we need to teach in kindergarten things that really belongs to parents. And Common Core wants us to teach things in kindergarten that parents need to be teaching children. And if parents aren't teaching that, well, somewhere along the line, we can figure that out. But the way we don't figure it out by the federal government bringing a global education system into our school districts that's costing us money, that's lowering the, it's kind of evening everybody across the board because we don't want to offend anybody. Nobody's a winner. Nobody's a loser. We're all the same. I'm sorry. There are achievers, and we need to go ahead and help those achievers go further, and Common Core is not the curriculum to help them do that.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mary. The investment in education, the cornerstone of our future and our present moment, is to make certain that there's self-discovery, that our students understand their strengths, their abilities, their passions in life, so that they can contribute effectively and meaningfully to the world around them. It begins and ends with education. When I served in the State Assembly, I pushed very hard to get placed on the Education Committee. And it was there that I met routinely with every school district that was part of my district. And there are many. And it was hearing from students, parents, teachers, and administrators, getting a good balance of input so as to know how we can move forward more aggressively, more soundly. As an engineer by trade, I've championed the efforts of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, to again give that skill set to all of our students. Whether they choose that career path or not, it's a basis, a strong base of identification and strength for them to have good critical thinking skills, analytical skills, be solution-oriented workers. That's really good. Now, when it comes to Common Core, what I've heard, what I believe is that we test too frequently. There's a way to manage that testing in a way to reduce it and have it more effective. And basically, the concern, which I believe is valid, is when you test students for something they weren't expected to learn, that's unfair. Test for what was required to be taught, make certain that it is not over-testing, and then don't implement a policy too quickly, and that was a common concern I heard. Too much, too soon. Do we need accountability? Do we need transparency? Do we need to measure the product? Back to my opening statement. It is one of the most valid investments we make. We should penny pinch. We should have a laser-sharp focus, making certain all students are given quality education, regardless of the zip code that they claim as home.
Thank you. The next question is with regard to the environment and will be answered by Mr. Tonko first. The question is, should there be a federal prohibition on fracking, and should there be a moratorium on building new gas pipelines?
Well, I think that in our energy policy area, and this comes before us all the time in energy and commerce, I think it's important for us to really develop soundness of innovation, of alternative technologies. We have to address climate change. When we offered some of these pipelines that were dealing with some of the most polluted oil supplies that had taken more energy to make available for the public, we're going down a path that has a 40-year commitment of reliance on fossil-based fuels. We need to be environmentally conscious of all these decisions that we make. And when it comes to hydrofracking, I think it's so important to recognize safety, set-asides for community response if it's required, and certainly making certain that the roads and the infrastructure that need to be available have the associated investment with them. But until all those boxes are checked, Mary, I have concerns because as a scientist, I want to make certain that we're not wrecking and damaging our water supplies. If many believe, and I share that belief, we're going from an oil economy to a water economy, where we're cleaning up the base of our energy supply, we then have a commodity in this district that is precious. And our water supplies should not be tampered with. We've seen what's happened in the neighboring state of Pennsylvania. We have many experts who are suggesting some of the earthquakes, which were severe in Oklahoma, might have been caused by tampering with our environment. So there's a lot of testing to do before you give a green light.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vitolo.
Well, I think there needs to be caution when it comes to fracking. I think there needs to be caution when it comes to any kind of drilling. But according to studies that have been done, there have been more wells contaminated by someone drilling a well for water near that property and near those wells because of contamination of sulfur and methane and other things. It's a dangerous, not a dangerous, but it's always something that there are problems that can happen when you start drilling. I'm in favor of fracking, done the safe way, done the proper way, done a controlled way, because what it would do is it would do two things. It would move America back into the energy market on a grand scale. Right now, Russia has the largest control of gas in the world. And matter of fact, they can shut the pipeline off to any country and control them any way they want. But a lot of those countries in Europe, they wanted us to bring a pipeline out so that we could get gas out to them so that there was a competition in the market. But there have been efforts by those who don't want to have competition in the market. They want to keep a certain balance of power. And we can't politicize energy, and we can't politicize jobs in America. Just because you want to keep the balance of powers in the world, that doesn't mean you start starving America. There are jobs, and there is an incredible amount of money that can be made safely if we bring gas to Europe or get gas to Europe. So I'm in favor of fracking. I'm in favor of the pipelines so long as things are done safely and the proper infrastructure is involved so that in the event there is an emergency, things can be dealt with in a proper fashion and that all our EMS people are properly trained to handle that.
Thank you. The next question will be answered by Mr. Vitolo first. The question is, Congressman Mike Rogers has sponsored a bill requesting that the United States leave the United Nations. Would you support that legislation?
I would. The United Nations really is an organization that wants to bring in globalism and equalization amongst all nations. Now, some people might think, well, hey, that sounds a little conspiracy-like. Whatever you want to think about it. Listen, we pay 32% of the bill for the United Nations. Russia pays about 10%, and then the rest of the world divvies up the rest. China pays a large amount as well. I think that the UN has been sucking dollars off of the United States, and I don't think that the UN should have the authority in the United States that they're being granted. They're being granted authority over our national parks, and I think that's unconstitutional. They're being granted authority. Matter of fact, Hillary had even mentioned using UN forces to help bring peace in our troubled cities. Listen, the problems with guns, the problems with trouble, the problem with, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, yes, there needs to be a discussion, but discussion needs to be relative on both sides. We all need to be civil individuals. And without civility, we're not going to have a proper society. But America has everything it needs to keep its civil conditions under control. We don't need to have blue hats in our city.
Thank you. Mr. Tonko.
Thank you, Mary. And to the point of the last question, if I might, my opponent talks about safety and making certain that all the elements, concerns of hydrofracking and pipelines be addressed. The conference in which he would serve has been notorious on pushing bills that expedite the process of pipelines without consumer input, without community input, without concern for safety. And so I think, we have to see the patterns for what they are and which caucus supports what. To the United Nations, I think that there's imagery to withdrawing from the United Nations. It's very easy for us to be seen as arrogant and a power force that doesn't care about the rest of the world. If there are inequities, if there is unfairness in assessment or some of the guidelines of the UN, let's address them because we are a powerful force in that body. But it's important for us to, again, maintain some sort of worldly dialogue that enables us to best understand the needs of other nations out there. That helps. I know there's been a lot of talk about UN in this campaign with the presidential candidates and a lot of talk about NATO. And when you start talking about undoing NATO and walking away from our European allies, that's been a contract since 1949, that's a very strong concern. And so I think we need to maintain our sense of a sound leader that is there for all nations to work for a universal harmony.
Thank you. The last question for tonight will be answered by Mr. Tonko first. And the question is, do you support term limits for Congress?
This term limit issue comes up all the time with the state legislature and the House of Representatives and Congress. And I think that if there's anything I've learned, and I have the utmost respect for staff at all of these bodies of government, they do a yeoman's job. They work, they burn the midnight oil. They're tremendously sound in their intellect. But once you offer term limits, you go into a situation where those who get their report card are limited in their service to this country, and the power force of staff behind the scene grows more and more with that sort of outcome. Look, I started obviously at the bottom of the list, especially with the T letter starting my name. When I got there in 2008, I'm beyond the 200 mark already. There's that much turnover in Congress. It happens. So I've moved from 435 or something in that range to less than 200 in a short 4 terms. And so, the people decide. You look at the strength of Sam Stratton, who was a voice that is still respected today. You look at the strength of Mike McNulty, who was a champion for this district, as was Sam Stratton. These people would have been termed limited, and their contributions to the strength. Just being on committees like Energy and Commerce and Science and Tech, the issue areas are very complex. They take a while to learn because you're not just dealing with your home base. You're required to know things about the entire country. Different regions have different strengths, different approaches. That alone takes a while. And so if we're to limit that sort of involvement, the point of the fact is people have the power to say yes or no. They have the term limit tool in their hands. And I think that it's about trust that you develop, and it's about doing the job that people think is fair and sound.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
I'll leave it with that.
Thank you. Mr. Vitolo.
I'm in favor of term limits, and I guess it's easy for me to say since when I get elected, I'm only going to be there for a short period of time. I plan on retiring shortly. I don't plan on staying there for more than 8 years. I think the maximum that a congressman should stay anywhere should stay is 8 years, with a ban on lifetime lobbying, with a ban on re-entering the political field for 5 years, because the problem is you develop power structures and you become a power broker. And honestly, Mr. Tonko, you know, if there were term limits, and we had an opportunity to put someone else in that office on the Democrat side, somebody who would have a better voter record for seniors, have a better voting record for veterans, have a better voting record for minorities. I'm sorry, I've spent about, I'm going to say over a month now in the south end of Albany. And when you have the average black male, all right, under the age of 25, you know what the unemployment rate is? Almost 80% for a black male under the age of 25. I'm sorry, you've been in politics for over 40 years. And what have you done for the south end of Albany? Politicians, Democrats have been in power for years and years and years in this area, and what have they done for the south end of Albany? The south end of Albany is crying for help. I was at a church, and their roof is falling in, and the church doesn't have enough money to fix that. You're at million-dollar fundraisers. Meanwhile, how come you're not doing any fundraisers down there in the south end of Albany?
Mr. Vitello.
I'm concerned.
Thank you.